The Donmeh of Turkey, wife-swapping Muslims waiting for a Jewish Messiah. The Times history of the war says about Salonika. The Greeks had to wait 483 years before the Theotokos regained her own. But the Salonika, which their armies entered in 1913, was radically a very different city from the Salonika of 1430. The Turks had opened it to Jewish immigration, and the Sephardim, fleeing from the intolerance of the most Catholic kings of Spain, had succeeded in making it in the course of 4 centuries into half a Jewish city. Of its 150,000 inhabitants, some 70,000 were Jews. In addition to these Jews, there were a group of crypto-Jews who, according to Sir Gerard Luther, externally professed Islamism. These were, and still are, referred to as the Donmeh. A more recent Jewish source, Acts of Faith, by Dan Ross, gives the following picture of these people. In addition to these Jews, there were a group of crypto-Jews who, according to Sir Gerard Luther, externally professed Islamism, but they were actually Jews. Not long after World War I, European diplomats faced one of the most bewildering dilemmas in the annals of Jewish identity. It occurred when the Ottoman Empire was carved into 2 new nations of Greece and Turkey. These 2 states agreed on a population exchange to transfer their peoples to match the new borders. In the Treaty of Lausanne, endorsed by most European powers in 1923, the 2 nations agreed to define identity according to religion. So there actually was a treaty, and more than one nation agreed to define the identity of Jews according to religion. With only a few exceptions, Muslims had to move to Turkey and Orthodox Christians to Greece. Jews, where they happened to live, were allowed to stay there. It became one of those occasions when the question, who is a Jew, was of more than academic interest. It was of more of academic interest to ask the question, to raise the question, who is a Jew? The city most affected by the population exchange was the old Turkish commercial center, Salonika, now Thessaloniki, Greece. It was perhaps the most Jewish city in the world. For centuries, until it was captured by Greece in 1912, more Jews had lived in Salonika than Greeks and Turks combined. Until 1912, more Jews had lived there than Greeks and Turks combined in Salonika. All right. It was the capital of Sephardi Jewry and, in more prosperous times, of the entire Jewish world. Jewish merchants had run the great trading houses. Jewish scholars headed the city's academies. And Jewish longshoremen controlled the docks of the bay. Sent by the dock of the bay, baby. Only Christians rested on Sunday, and only Muslims on Fridays. The Jews on Saturdays, I reckon, them being a Sabbath. But the entire city sat down each Saturday. It was ruled. A group of 10 to 15,000 Muslims in Salonika, known as the Donmeh, tried to circumvent the population exchange. They tried to circumvent the population exchange. They were actually Jews, but they pretended to be Muslims. All right, let me just think outside the box. So if they said they were Muslims, they could say there was a percentage of Muslims who actually weren't Muslims. They were Jews. That way they could run the city and be closed down on Saturdays. And they were happened to be open on Fridays. And only authentic Muslims would be closed on Friday, is what they're saying. Tried to circumvent the population exchange. They said they were not really Turks, but Jews who only practiced the Muslim religion. Their appeal was denied. The Greek government did not dispute their contention, but simply pointed to the Treaty of Lausanne, which defined Turks by religion, not ethnic origin. The Treaty of Lausanne, which defined Turks by religion. So not only did it define Jews by religion, and Muslims by religion, Turks by religion, Christians by religion, or whatever it was, not ethnic origin. At about the same time, a few Donmeh asked Salonik's rabbis to accept them back into Judaism. So, because they were actually Jews anyway, they were just trying to kind of sway the system, is what I'm hearing, I don't know. And they're like, well, this ain't going to work. It don't look like, so we're going to go back. Daddy say, hey, man, we're just joking. We was playing, man. Scheming, man. He's doing their thing right there. Trying to help us out, man. But it's not helping because the laws of the day or whatever's on the books is not really going our way. So understand that that's what we're doing and let us back in. About the same time, a few Donmeh asked Salonik's rabbis to accept them back into Judaism. They claimed they were really secret Jews. For the last 240 years, they said, they had only pretended to be Muslims. The rabbis, too, denied their appeal. But like the Greeks, they did not dispute the Donmeh's strange contention. Their refusal was based on even odder grounds, that the Donmeh were bastards, in Hebrew, Mazrim. They held annual orgies where they slept with each other's spouses, charged their rabbis, and could not be sure who their fathers were. As the Bible says, a bastard shall not enter into the assembly of the Lord, even into the 10th generation. The Donmeh had no alternative but to leave Salonika. The vast majority joined Salonika's other Muslims in the exodus to Turkey. There the Donmeh settled in 3 cities: Izmir, formerly Smyrna; Edrin, formerly Adrianople; and Istanbul, formerly Constantinople. Going to Constantinople! Most continue to live together in their own neighborhoods. Some, no one knows how many, continued practicing their strange secret cult. To this day, a few aging Muslims in those cities may still be praying to the God of the Jews and waiting for the return of the Messiah, Shabbatai Zevi. The word Donmeh means convert in Turkish, but only Salonikas. Turks used the name for the sect. Jews preferred to call the name Minim, a word meaning heretics. Turks used the name for the sect, that word, Donmeh. Jews preferred to call them Minim. They called them heretics. The Donmeh themselves used neither of those terms, preferring another Hebrew word, ananim, meaning believers. This terminology was an accurate reflection of each group's perspective in this day and age. What the Donmeh believed in can only be described as incredible, that a 17th century false messiah named Shabbatai Zevi was the Redeemer of Israel, that the path of redemption lay in pretending to be a Muslim, and that Shabbatai's appearance had invalidated old concepts of law and morality. What once was prohibited was now permitted. The story of the Donmeh may be the most bizarre in the annals of Judaism. That voluntary Marranos lived a licentious double life as Jews and Muslims in a major European city in our own time challenges our credulity. Only by suspending our rational instincts can we comprehend their faith in a false Messiah, otherwise discrediting hundreds of years before. Acts of Faith then tries to explain how such strange events could have come about. Mysticism and Messianism used to be the neglected stepchildren of Jewish studies, until recent modern Jews preferred to ignore the dark side of their heritage. Jewish historians, schooled in 19th century rationalism, dismissed it as a superstition of a misguided few. As this has changed in the last few decades, led by the remarkable Gershom Scholem, who virtually invented Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, as a field for scientific research, contemporary scholars are reevaluating its place in Jewish history. Long neglected writings have been brought to light and maligned philosophies have been rehabilitated. The Messianic movement of Sabbatai Dedi is now recognized for its enormous impact on Judaism. It is considered, in Scholem's own words, one of the most important phenomena of Jewish history and in the history of religions. Shabbatai Zevi was born in Smyrna on the Aegean coast of Turkey. In 1626, the first half of his life was spent in solitude and continence, apparently because of an unpleasant experience with masturbation at the age of 15. He was later divorced by his first two wives because he refused to consummate their marriages. He was a brilliant student and was ordained by a rabbi at the age of 18. Shortly afterwards, he began to study Kabbalah, as did many rabbis of his day. But Shabbatai stood out from the young Kabbalists by virtue of his periods of illumination, as his followers called them. At odd intervals, it would have filled with an ecstatic, explicit joy when he would perform strange acts which often violated Jewish law. On re-examining Shabbatai Zevi's behavior in the light of modern psychology, Ross states that Scholem finds unmistakable evidence that Shabbatai suffered from manic depressive. He says that Shabbatai's illuminations were merely the manic phases of personal cycle, which also included periods of deep, unrelieved melancholy, when he was tormented by demonic, often erotic anxieties. In his early years, Shabbatai only hinted he might be the Messiah. He was dismissed as a crackpot, and his eccentricities rewarded with excommunication by several Jewish communities. It was not until shortly after his 39th birthday, when he joined forces with the ascetic Palestinian rabbi named Nathan of Gaza, that Shabbatai was taken seriously. Nathan became his leading prophet, reinterpreting popular Kabbalistic doctrines to fit Shabbatai's symptoms. He declared that Shabbatai's soul was waging a battle for freedom from the forces of evil. In his states of illumination, Shabbatai was prevailing. In his days of darkness, he was not. Nathan compared the Messiah to Job, who also fell under the influence of Satan before returning to divine favor. But unlike Job, Shabbatai's battle would decide the future of all mankind. A new age was dawning. Nathan's teachings touched a chord of longing among Jews everywhere. Rich and poor alike flocked to Shabbatai's banner for the year-long revel in 1665 to 66. Pious Jews danced in the streets of Amsterdam. Jewish gamblers in London and Hamburg offered 10 to 1 odds that Shabbatai would rule the world within 2 years. Polish visitors packed their villages, their belongings, for a trip to Jerusalem, expecting to ride there on the backs of clouds. Shabbatai's believers clashed with infidels in the streets of Constantinople, easily carrying the day. Iranian Jews abandoned their homes to live in the fields, dressed in sackcloth and ashes. Even in far-off Yemen, Jews ceased all business, giving their money to charity and put off their clothes with a trip to Jerusalem. In Salonika, perhaps the world's largest Jewish community, 700 to 800 girls were married off early in order to speed up redemption. Salonika's richest merchants gave away their belongings, touching on an economic crisis from which the city never fully recovered. Shabbatai himself spent much of his time in prison. He was arrested on his way to Constantinople to assume the Sultan's throne, just 8 months after he and Nathan had declared his mission. Although treason was ordinary capital crime, the unusual nature of Shabbatai's troopeless rebellion, because he didn't need troops, everybody just fell along in line. Troopeless rebellion apparently spared his neck. In September of 1666, Shabbatai Zevi was brought before the Sultan in Adrianople. Thousands of believers followed, expecting to see Sultan turn over the throne. They were cruelly disappointed. Shabbatai was allowed to live only by agreeing to convert. The Messiah became a Muslim. His apostasy threw Shabbatai's followers into turmoil. Most admitted their error and returned to more traditional forms of Judaism, but a surprisingly large number was unable to. A surprisingly large number of his followers were unable to return to Judaism. Now, was it because they were just tied up in wanting to be Muslims and all, Turks? Or is it because at that time they didn't cross too many lines where the Jews, the other Jews that considered themselves Jews, that really never went along with it, they wouldn't let them back in. They're like, man, you're too far gone. You are too far gone. You done went here. And you done went places to where, you know, where to go. This is mainly about Muslims and the Turk Muslims and Jews. It's not much about Christians. There's a portion about Christians. We're not following that right now. Because at the time, there's a lot of these Catholic Roman Christians, whatever, they didn't put up with shit. Or they stayed away from it, in other words. Shabbatai was allowed to live only by agreeing to convert. The Messiah became a Muslim. His apostasy threw Shabbatai's followers into turmoil. Most admitted their error and returned to more traditional forms of Judaism, but a surprisingly large number were unable to. Their messianic experience had been so profound, actually living and behaving as though Messiah had already arrived, that even his conversion to Islam could be rationalized. Their rationalization, a doctrine of necessary apostasy, that the Messiah had to descend to the deepest realms of evil in order to return and redeem the entire world. This doctrine had a personal appeal for many believers who were themselves born or as had descended from Morenos of Spain and Portugal. From them it was no sin to pretend to follow another religion. What mattered most was their inner reality, in their hearts, that they all remained Jews who followed a new and higher law introduced by Shabbatai Zevi. This higher law is the key to their theology, which was based on the idea of two Torahs. There's at least two. There's probably three. At least three. Because I don't think this is necessarily correct. So I know there's at least another, so there's at least three. Two sets of laws. They considered traditional Jewish law just an earthly Torah, which was only valid until the coming of the Messiah. I kind of get that, but I don't even know if it was valid before then, because they said I don't even need your offerings in this and this in the Old Testament. So, I mean, whatever. But only until the coming of Shabbatai had replaced it with a higher spiritual Torah. Paradoxically, these two Torahs were considered one and the same. The new spiritual Torah was the previously hidden inner meaning of the earthly Torah. In effect, it was the idea of law without any specific laws. Because the law is to you is the law is to you. And it might not be wrong for me, but it's wrong for you. Is it wrong for everything? Well, it might be. But all law is breaking the law anyway, but for you individually. As Shabbatins explained, a law without any specific laws. As Shabbatins explained it in their rewritten version of the Jewish Credo and Merim, I believe with perfect faith that this Torah cannot be exchanged and there will be no other Torah. Only the commandments have been abolished. That's what they say. Human nature has a nasty habit of repeating its past mistakes, and the similarities between the erroneous ideas of the Donmeh and those which occurred among the children of Israel prior to, during, and after the Exodus from Egypt are remarkably consistent. Truly, they would have remained God's chosen people had they maintained the integrity of Torah and upheld its commandments. And the reason for their demise is evident from the words of Rabbi Yosef Sonnenfeld, the chief rabbi of the Orthodox anti-Zionist community in the Holy Land. For the past 2,000 years, the Jews have been lacking the purity required by the Torah, which is why they no longer qualify for the exalted title of God's chosen people. Nor do they qualify for a state, and a secular state at that, in the Holy Land. And that's been deleted. Oh, go girl, get that right there. That's what this is.